Have you ever seen a moment where Africa spoke with one voice and the whole world had to listen? That is exactly what happened at the just concluded United Nations General Assembly 2025. Kenya's President William Ruto stood on the global stage and told the truth, straight to the face of world powers. He said, "You cannot claim to be the United Nations, while disregarding the voice of 54 nations. It is not possible." And guess what? He was fully backed by Burkina Faso's captain Ibrahim Traoré. This was not just talk. It was a bold statement that Africa is tired of being sidelined, especially when it comes to permanent membership at the UN Security Council. Now, let us break this powerful story into 3 clear chapters. At the United Nations General Assembly 2025, William Ruto did not go there to play politics. He went there to speak for a continent. Standing before world leaders, he made it clear that Africa will no longer accept being treated like outsiders in decisions that affect the whole world. He asked a simple question: how can you call it the United Nations when 54 countries from Africa have no permanent seat on the Security Council? This was more than just a speech. It was a direct challenge to a system that has been in place since after World War II. A system where the powerful countries keep power, while Africa is told to just sit and clap. Ruto's words cut deep because they carried truth. The truth that Africa is no longer silent. The truth that Africa has numbers, resources, and young people who are shaping the future. The truth that without Africa, the United Nations is incomplete. For decades, African leaders have gone to the UN General Assembly and delivered speeches that the world forgot in less than a week. Many of those speeches were polite, decorated with diplomatic language, and often avoided calling out the hard facts. But this time, Ruto broke away from that tradition. His words were sharp, fearless, and straight to the point. He did not try to please anybody. He did not try to flatter the powerful nations. Instead, he put the truth on the table in a way that everybody in that room could feel. He reminded them that Africa is not a guest in the world system. Africa is part of it, and not just a small part. With 54 countries, more than 1.4 billion people, and vast natural resources, Africa is one of the strongest blocs in the global community. Yet when it comes to the highest decision-making body of the United Nations, the Security Council, Africa is only seen when temporary seats are shared. Permanent membership, the place where the real power lies, has been denied to Africa since the very beginning of the UN. Ruto's statement shook the hall because it was not only about fairness, but also about logic. The Security Council is supposed to represent the world, but how can it claim to do so when an entire continent is locked out? Africa is not a small corner of the globe. Africa is bigger than Europe, bigger than North America, and holds a significant percentage of the world's population. To ignore such a massive region is not just unfair, it is dishonest. That is why Ruto's words were more than politics. They were a mirror to the hypocrisy of the global system. He told the powers that be, you cannot keep calling it the United Nations while you continue to ignore 54 nations. And as he said this, many Africans watching felt that for once, someone was saying what they have always known in their hearts. The strength of Ruto's message came from his tone and the moment in which he delivered it. The world today is different from what it was in 1945, when the UN was created. Back then, many African countries were still under colonial rule. They were not seen as independent voices. But today, every African nation is sovereign, every African people have their flag, and the continent itself is rising in influence. Technology, trade, natural wealth, and a growing youthful population are turning Africa into a key player. Ruto understood this reality and decided it was time to put it in the open. He was not just representing Kenya. He was standing for the whole of Africa. And in that room, his statement became a fire that burned into the ears of those who still want Africa to remain silent. What makes this moment special is that Ruto did not just complain, he challenged the world to face its own contradictions. If the United Nations truly wants to be the place where all nations gather in equality, then Africa must be at the permanent decision-making table. Otherwise, the name United Nations is just a title without meaning. For Africans listening, this speech was not just another diplomatic event. It was a call for dignity. It was a reminder that silence has gone on long enough. Leaders before have tried to raise the issue quietly, but it never gained momentum. This time, Ruto placed it front and center so that nobody could dodge it. The truth is, Africa has been the playground of global powers for too long. Wars are fought here, peace missions are stationed here, and resources are taken from here. Yet when the permanent members of the Security Council sit to decide the future of the world, Africa is nowhere to be found. That contradiction is what Ruto tore apart with his words. In that moment, the General Assembly was not just a hall of speeches. It became a courtroom where Ruto was the prosecutor, and the world powers were the accused. He charged them with neglecting a whole continent. He charged them with pretending to be fair while maintaining a structure that is anything but fair. And he did it without raising his voice, without anger, but with undeniable truth. That is why his words echoed. That is why the hall was silent as he spoke. Because the truth is powerful, and when spoken clearly, it cannot be ignored. By the end of his speech, it was no longer about Kenya. It was about Africa. It was about justice. It was about telling the world that a new era has come, and in this era, Africa will not watch from the sidelines. Ruto set the fire. He reminded everyone that the days of keeping Africa silent are coming to an end. His voice was not just his, it was the voice of 54 nations carried in one man's speech. And that fire he lit is the reason this UN session will be remembered for years to come. Right after Ruto spoke, Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso gave his full support. And when Traoré speaks, young Africans listen. Traoré did not try to twist words. He simply stood by Ruto, showing the world that this is not just about one president or one country. It is about a continent rising together. By standing with Ruto, Traoré gave the message more power. Because while Ruto represents Kenya and East Africa, Traoré represents the new spirit of bold leadership in West Africa. Together, they created a picture that the world could not ignore. Africa is tired of being pushed aside, and this new generation of leaders is ready to fight for respect on the world stage. When Ibrahim Traoré gave his support to William Ruto's words at the UN, it was not just a political gesture. It was a statement of unity. For a long time, Africa has been described as a divided continent, where leaders rarely agree on one common stand. But in that moment, Traoré showed that the younger generation of African leaders are not afraid to stand shoulder to shoulder when it comes to the dignity of their people. Traoré himself is not a man who speaks with unnecessary grammar. He is direct, he is bold, and he has built a reputation as one of the new voices of African resistance. His government in Burkina Faso came in through a struggle against weak leadership and foreign interference. That background makes his support for Ruto even more powerful, because people know he speaks from the heart of Africa's fight for independence in the modern age. By standing with Ruto, Traoré connected West Africa and East Africa under one common voice. That voice was telling the world that Africa has had enough. For years, African leaders have gone to the UN individually, sometimes making demands that the world did not take seriously because there was no united backing. But this time, the combination of Ruto and Traoré created a force that nobody could dismiss. It is important to understand that the United Nations General Assembly is full of speeches. Every year, presidents and prime ministers come, talk, and leave. Many times, the speeches are forgotten before the meeting even ends. But when Ruto spoke and Traoré gave his support, the atmosphere changed. People could feel that this was not just another African complaint, it was a serious warning that Africa is beginning to act differently. Traoré's support carried weight because of who he is and what he represents. He is young, fearless, and widely respected among Africa's youth. To them, he is not just a president, he is a symbol of change, a man who refuses to bow down to the usual global pressure. So when he aligned himself with Ruto's message, young Africans across the continent felt that this was not just politics, it was their future being defended. This unity between Ruto and Traoré also sent a clear signal to the world powers. For a long time, the strategy of the global system has been to divide African leaders, to make sure that they do not speak with one voice. Some leaders are pressured with aid, others with trade deals, and many are simply silenced through diplomacy. But with Ruto and Traoré joining forces publicly, that old strategy was challenged. It showed that Africa can unite, even across regions, to demand what belongs to it. Another reason Traoré's support mattered so much is because of his position on sovereignty. He has repeatedly made it clear that Burkina Faso, and Africa by extension, must control its own destiny. He has expelled foreign forces from his soil, and he has spoken openly about Africa's right to manage its own resources. When such a leader stands with Ruto to demand Africa's place at the UN Security Council, it is not seen as empty talk. It is seen as action waiting to happen. Together, Ruto and Traoré became a symbol of two important African realities: diplomacy and resistance. Ruto, a democratically elected president with a strong international presence, represented diplomacy, speaking with authority but in the language of dialogue. Traoré, a revolutionary soldier turned leader, represented resistance, speaking with raw energy that shows Africa is no longer afraid. This balance made their message unshakable. If the world ignores the diplomat, then the soldier is waiting. If the world ignores the calm voice, then the fiery one is ready to rise. That combination gave Africa's demand a new kind of weight. For Africans watching at home, especially Nigerians, Ghanaians, South Africans, and people across the continent, the image of Ruto and Traoré together felt refreshing. It reminded them that Africa can actually come together if the right voices lead. It also reminded them that unity is not just a dream, it can become a reality when leaders decide to put pride and ego aside. The truth is, Africa has always had the numbers, the resources, and the culture. What has been missing is unity. And in that UN General Assembly, Ruto and Traoré gave a glimpse of what that unity looks like. One leader speaks, another stands behind him, and together they tell the world, this is no longer a one-man fight. This is a continental stand. By the end of that moment, it was clear that the world could not just brush the issue aside. Because if more African leaders follow the example of Ruto and Traoré, then the pressure on the UN will become too strong to ignore. This was not just support. It was a sign that Africa is beginning to produce leaders who understand the power of solidarity. Leaders who know that the days of begging are over, and the days of demanding have begun. That is why Traoré's backing of Ruto was so important. It turned one bold speech into a continental voice. It turned a single demand into a united front. And it showed that the next generation of African leaders are not waiting politely anymore, they are ready to fight for Africa's place at the table. This moment is not just about speeches at the UN. It is about history. For years, African leaders have complained quietly about exclusion from the Security Council. But now, leaders like Ruto and Traoré are saying it loudly, without fear. The Security Council makes decisions about war, peace, sanctions, and global stability. These are the biggest decisions in the world. But when you look at the permanent members, United States, Russia, China, France, and the United Kingdom, something is missing. Out of all 5, not a single one represents Africa. Yet Africa is the second largest continent, both in land and population. More than 1.4 billion people, 54 nations, countless resources, still no permanent voice at the table. How does that make sense? That is why the words of William Ruto and the backing of Ibrahim Traoré hit so hard. They were not just raising a complaint. They were exposing the truth. The United Nations cannot continue to pretend it is fair, while leaving out an entire continent from the highest level of decision-making. The reason this moment matters is because it carries the weight of timing. The world is changing. Old powers are struggling with economic crises, political division, and wars that consume their attention. At the same time, Africa is rising. Its population is young and growing fast. Its cities are expanding. Its technology and innovation are improving. Its resources, from minerals to energy, are in high demand across the world. In short, Africa is no longer the future continent, it is the present. When Ruto said, "You cannot claim to be the United Nations while disregarding the voice of 54 nations," he was telling the world that the future cannot be built on the old order. Traoré's support made it even stronger, because he added the element of boldness, the kind of voice that says Africa will not only speak, it will act if ignored. This is why the 2025 UN session will be remembered. It is the first time in a long while that Africa's demand was put so clearly and with so much unity. In the past, Africa has been treated like a background actor in world politics. Many powerful nations look at Africa only as a supplier of raw materials or a place for humanitarian aid. But this new message is different. It is saying that Africa is not a side note, it is a main character in the story of the world. For Nigerians and many Africans watching, it felt like a wake-up call. People could see that when leaders stand together, the world has no choice but to listen. It also reminded Africans that respect is never given freely, it is demanded. For too long, Africa has begged for recognition. Now, voices like Ruto and Traore are saying begging days are over. Another reason this moment matters is because it shakes the foundation of global power. The 5 permanent members of the Security Council enjoy privileges that no one else has. They have veto power, which means they can block any decision they don't like. This power has been used many times to protect their interests, while Africa has no such privilege. That imbalance has kept the world unfair for decades. But now, with Africa openly challenging the system, pressure is building. The symbolism of Ruto and Traore standing together is also powerful. Ruto represents diplomacy and structure. Traore represents defiance and courage. When those two energies combine, it sends a signal that Africa is no longer going to accept excuses. If dialogue does not work, stronger actions may follow. And the world knows this, which is why the silence in that UN hall was so heavy. The truth is, the United Nations cannot remain credible if it continues to lock Africa out. Every year, resolutions are made about Africa, wars, peace missions, sanctions, and development. Yet the people of Africa are not fully represented in making those resolutions. That contradiction makes the UN look more like a club of old powers, rather than a true house of nations. Ruto and Traore exposed this, and that is why their words matter so much. For Africans, especially the younger generation, this is about dignity. It is about knowing that their continent cannot be ignored forever. It is about seeing leaders who are willing to say what others were afraid to say. And once that door of truth is opened, it cannot be closed again. The 2025 UN General Assembly may be remembered as the moment when Africa officially stood up. Ruto lit the fire. Traore added fuel. And now the flame is spreading. More leaders are likely to join in, because the demand is not unreasonable, it is basic fairness. If the United Nations is truly united, then every part of the world must be represented at the highest table. That is why this moment matters. It is not just about seats in New York. It is about respect. It is about equality. It is about the recognition that Africa is not a silent spectator but a central player in the global system. From now on, the world will have to answer a simple question: how can you call it the United Nations, while excluding 54 nations? That question will not go away. It will grow louder until justice is done.